Why is trusting God so hard when it comes to your child, even when you genuinely want to trust Him? You've prayed for your child, you've told the Lord that you trust Him, but when something bad happens, your child makes another decision that scares you, they say something that tells you how very far they are from Jesus, or you don't know how to approach the problems you're facing, suddenly, trusting God feels a whole lot harder than you thought it would. Let's be real. Reminding yourself to just trust God isn't always enough. Sometimes we need to understand what is making trust so difficult for us in the first place. So today I'm sharing 4 things that hold us back from trusting Him when it comes to our children and what we can do about those things. Because once you can recognize what's happening, you'll know how to let God work in your life instead of trying to control everything around you. So make your iced coffee, find a comfortable place to listen, and let's dive in. Hi friends, welcome to the Praying Moms of Estranged Children podcast. Are you struggling with strained relationships and losses that have shaken your faith and left you wondering where God is? If you long for peace, a deeper prayer life, and faith that holds steady, you're in the right place. I'm Sarah, a wife, mom of adult kids, and your Jesus-loving friend. Here you'll find encouragement to help you trust God and practical tools to pray with confidence as you walk closely with Him. So turn off your alarm clock, pour a strong latte, and find peace as you trust God with your children and your broken relationships. Hey friend, if you feel like you're constantly working on the learning curve of trusting God and you're not sure how to pray for your child and your relationship, I invite you to book a Peaceful Mom coaching session with me at bit.ly/peaceful mom, all one word. That's bit.ly/peaceful mom. I'm ready to help you take your next step towards surrendering your situation and your child to the Lord. Hey friend, do you feel sometimes like parenting was supposed to get easier when your kids got older, but instead it's gotten harder? Maybe a whole lot harder? Last week, I was challenged to give my worries and fears and my desire to control and my desire to understand back to God again. What set it all off is I received some text messages from my younger son in which he seemed to be really struggling with thoughts of despair and hopelessness because he hasn't figured out his purpose in life yet. Now, this son and I were once estranged, and something you learn as an estranged mom is the importance of listening really well. When he texted me, he was dealing with some pretty heavy feelings, and those are really hard for a mother to hear. I tried to listen and to empathize, and I hoped that he would hear how much I cared. But then I woke up in the middle of the night after that with a knot in my stomach, that sour feeling you have when things just aren't going well. And I woke up feeling like that because I was genuinely worried about him. I was afraid that he might never discover his purpose in life. And honestly, I can't see right now what will happen in his future or the road that he will take. I don't know how long it will take him to figure out his purpose, the thing that God has uniquely gifted him to do. All I can really do is pray for him to seek the Lord's guidance and trust that God will guide his steps and influence him where I have the opportunity. So as I lay there thinking about my son's challenge to find his purpose, I realized how quickly fear and worry can make it harder to trust God, even when we know that that's exactly what we need to do. And I think there are some really specific reasons this happens to us, especially when it comes to our kids. Sometimes it's hard to trust God because what you're seeing right now is scary, and that can put you into a mindset of fear. And let's be real, sometimes there's a lot more going on than estrangement or just the typical experience of having a prodigal child. If your child is battling a drug or alcohol addiction and you know he's making some really dangerous choices, you might be seriously afraid of what his very next action might be. Maybe your daughter has lost another job and you're wondering how she's even going to pay her bills. Or maybe what scares you the most is knowing that your children have walked away from Jesus and they're showing no sign of turning back to Him. These are real fears. And when you're a mom watching your child go through things like that, of course you're going to have moments when you feel afraid. If you didn't, you wouldn't be human. Fear looks at your child's situation and says, "This is scary." While that can be true, fear becomes a problem when what you see happening becomes more powerful in your mind than what you know to be true about God and His faithfulness. Something I think that's important to realize is that you can have tremendous faith and still experience fear. I certainly do. Having faith doesn't mean you're never going to feel afraid, but faith is what you lean on when fear starts telling you that what you're seeing right now scares you. When fear becomes louder than your faith, that's when you know it's a problem. So when fear rises in your mind, you have to bring yourself back to what you know about God. He is present. He is powerful. He's working, and He sees everything you're seeing, and He knows what you can't possibly know. I hope that brings you comfort, because when you find yourself fighting fear, you've got to bring yourself back to what you know about God and what His Word says about His character. So remind yourself that He can still bring something good out of a situation that looks incredibly bleak right now. Maybe what makes some of His answers feel miraculous after the fact when you look back is that back then, you couldn't see any possible way for something good, anything good, to come out of what you were experiencing. But God could, and maybe now you can look back at your life to see examples of how He came through for you or how He worked in some mysterious way in this or that situation. I want to encourage you that if He did it before, He can do it again. Isaiah 41:10 says, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." Do you see what God gives us in that verse? He doesn't tell us that our scary circumstances aren't real. He reminds us that He is going to be with us in the middle of them. Now, fear and worry can feel really similar, so I want to untangle those. Here's how I think about the difference. Fear starts with something that's happening right now. Worry takes what I'm seeing and experiencing and carries that into tomorrow. It starts asking all the what-if questions. If your child is struggling with an addiction, you start wondering, what if he never gets sober? If your child has walked away from God, you might wonder, what if she never comes back to Him? Was she ever even really a Christian to begin with? And if you're estranged from your prodigal child, your mind can easily fall into thinking, what if we never reconcile? What if I never get to have the relationship with him or her that I've been hoping and praying for so long? Worry takes something painful that's happening today and starts writing tomorrow's story with it. And usually it's not a very hopeful story. It's writing the worst case scenario that you could possibly imagine. Jesus gives us a glimpse about this in Luke 12, verses 25 and 26. He said, "Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest?" The fact that Jesus ever mentioned this tells us that He knew our human proclivity to worry. And that question is important for us to consider because worry can make us feel like we're doing something when we're really not doing anything. You start to think, I'm paying attention to what's happening in my child's life. I'm playing out scenarios in my mind of what could happen because I need to try to figure this out and prevent something bad from happening. You can run through every possible scenario in your mind. You can lie awake at night trying to figure out how everything is going to turn out. We've all spent hours ruminating on what might happen to our children, but where does all of that worrying and ruminating get us? All that mental activity isn't actually changing any outcomes. None of it changes tomorrow. It just steals the peace that we could have today. So when we don't leave those worries with God, we usually start looking for ways to do something about them ourselves. And once you've imagined all those things happening, it's really hard to just sit there and do nothing about it. This is where we need to step back from worrying about how things are going to turn out. If you've tried to give your problem to God and you find yourself picking it right back up and worrying about it again, that's a signal to stop trying to figure out the future. Bring your mind back to what you know about God right now. Pray about those things that you're worried about and ask the Lord what your child needs right now. Pray about that. And then remind yourself that even though you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, God is going to be there, waiting to guide you through that next day. The problem with trying to fix whatever you can before things get worse in your child's life is that's where we can start reaching for control, because we like to control things. Control makes us feel like we have some kind of power, even a little bit of power over what's happening. And yes, there are things that we can sometimes influence, but usually our level of control is relatively small. And there are also outcomes that we simply can't and shouldn't try to control. What I found through my own parenting experience is that trying to control outcomes in our children's lives will wear us out. We have a biblical example of this in Genesis with the story of Abraham and Sarah. You probably know the story. God had promised Abraham and Sarah that they would have a son. Year after year went by and still they had no baby. So Sarah got tired of waiting and decided to take matters into her own hands. Instead of continuing to wait for God to fulfill his promise, she gave her servant Hagar to Abraham so that Hagar could have a child for her. Like, talk about crazy, right? She decided to create a surrogate mother situation. She was trying to bring about the outcome that God had promised, but there were a few problems, and doing it her own way created a lot of jealousy, conflict, and tremendous heartache in their family. God hadn't forgotten his promises. Sarah just couldn't see how or when he was going to fulfill it. And I think we can relate to that because waiting can be really hard, especially if you've been waiting on God for a long, long time. Like you've been praying for your child. You've been asking God to soften their heart or to bring them back to him. And month after month or year after year, you might still be looking at circumstances that don't seem to be changing at all. So, like Sarah, we can sometimes mistake God's delays and think he's forgotten about his promises or our prayers. When our children stray or our relationships are still broken, even after we've tried everything we can to fix them, or things aren't changing according to our desired timeline, we start thinking we need to do something to make change happen, just like Sarah did. Doing something can feel a whole lot better to us than continuing to wait on God. And that's our natural instinct, to grab the steering wheel. So we send another text because we think, well, maybe this one will finally get through to my child. We try to explain ourselves one more time, even though it didn't work last time. We give our children advice that they didn't ask for because we can see where their choices are taking them, and we're worried, we're afraid, we want to do something to control what's happening. And we're doing all these things because we think that taking some kind of action, any kind of action, makes us feel less helpless. What I found is that urge to do something probably isn't coming from God. It's coming from our own anxiety and our desire to control outcomes. But God doesn't need our help. He hasn't forgotten your needs. He hasn't forgotten the petitions that you've brought to his throne room in prayer. So before you send the text or the email, before you offer the advice, before you step in to solve that problem, or try one more thing to make something happen, ask yourself if you're doing that because you believe God is leading you to do it, or if you're doing it because you're anxious and you just want to make something happen. I want to encourage you to pray and leave the outcomes in God's hands. Trust that he can do what needs to be done in your child's life according to his timetable. He wants you to trust him. Now, you might be thinking, okay, Sarah, but how am I supposed to trust God when I don't understand what he's doing, when things look worse than ever? Listen, I have been there. I understand how you feel. And there are situations in which God is doing things that simply don't make sense to us. When you've asked him to intervene and instead of seeing a breakthrough, you're still waiting for him to answer. Or when his answer looks pretty different from what you asked for. That is really challenging for us to accept. It's a whole lot easier to trust God when we can see where He's taking us and understand what He's doing or why He's doing it that way. But Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6 tell us, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. I think those words, do not depend on your own understanding, are so important because sometimes we get those things backwards. We want God to explain what He's doing so that we'll feel comfortable trusting Him. But that's not really how trust works. If I have to understand what God is doing before I'm willing to trust Him, then I'm really depending on my own ability to make sense of what He's doing. And when it comes to our children, there are always going to be things that we simply don't understand. We won't always know why they're making the choices they're making. We don't know what God is doing in their hearts, and sometimes we will fear that He isn't doing anything at all. And we probably can't see how things happening today might eventually fit into a much bigger story. I don't know about you, but that's difficult for me because I like clarity. I like explanations. I like knowing why something is happening. I like being able to connect point A to point B and say, oh, okay, Lord, now I see what you're doing. But usually I don't get that kind of explanation or that clarity, at least not in the moment when it's happening. So maybe one of the reasons it's so hard to trust God with your child is that you're waiting for what He's doing to make sense to you. But you don't have to have all the answers before you can trust Him. Sometimes God gives us understanding later, and sometimes He simply asks us to trust Him without it. If you've been struggling to trust God with your child and what's going on in their life, I hope this episode has helped you understand a little more about why trust can be so hard and what to do when it is. What you're seeing in your child's life right now might genuinely scare you. Your mind might keep jumping ahead to everything that could go wrong. You might find yourself trying to control the outcome because doing something makes you feel less helpless. And sometimes you simply don't understand what God is doing. None of those things mean that you don't have faith, but they can show you where your faith needs to become a little stronger. So here's what I want you to do this week. Whenever you notice yourself struggling to trust God with something that's happening with your child, stop and ask yourself, what is making it hard for me to trust God with this right now? Am I afraid of what I'm seeing? That's fear. Am I worrying about what could happen? That's worry. Am I trying to control the outcome? That's your desire to control. Or am I waiting for God to make sense before I'm willing to trust Him? That's trying to understand everything, rather than believing that He's got it under control. Once you recognize what's getting in your way of trusting Him, you know what you need to bring to God in prayer. If it's fear, tell Him what scares you. If it's worry, tell Him what you're afraid might happen. If you're reaching for control, ask Him to show you what actually belongs to you and what doesn't. And if you don't understand what He's doing, tell Him that too. He can handle any emotion or feeling that you bring to Him. You don't have to pretend with Him. Tell Him exactly where you're struggling to trust Him and why, because He'll give you peace in that area. And then take the next step of faith. Don't worry about the next 10 steps. Just focus on the next step that's right in front of you. Because trusting God with your child isn't something that you master once and never struggle with again. There are going to be days when you find yourself back at square one, having to make that conscious choice to trust Him all over again. And when you do, you're strengthening your faith and you're learning to depend on Him a little more than you did before. I know you might not know what's going to happen with your child. You may not understand what God is doing right now. But you can choose what you're going to do with your fear, your worry, your desire to influence outcomes, and your unanswered questions. Sometimes the places where trusting God feels the hardest are the very places where our faith needs to grow. So bring those places to Him. Let Him meet you in the fear. Let Him meet you in the worry and your need for control, and even when you don't understand what's happening. And remember, friend, He will be right there with you as you do. Hey friend, do you want to join a community of Christian women who are praying for their prodigal or estranged children, just like you are? Inside my Facebook group, Praying Moms of Estranged and Prodigal Adult Children, you'll get prayer tools and scripture-based encouragement to help you trust God with your adult children. Join now at https://bit.ly/prayingmom. Hey, I hope today's episode inspired you. If so, would you click the follow button for the show and share it with someone who wants to learn more about trusting God? Also, please take 30 seconds to leave me a quick review of the show on Apple Podcasts. It means so much to me to know this podcast is encouraging you. Set your alarm to wake up to Jesus and your mocha, and meet me here every Tuesday for a new episode. See you soon!